The morning sunlight spilled across the polished glass walls of the towering headquarters, making the building glow like a monument to success. Employees hurried through the revolving doors with coffee cups and laptops, dressed in expensive suits and confident smiles. But among them walked one man who looked painfully out of place. His faded denim jacket had been carefully stitched at the elbows. His shoes had lost their shine years ago, and his worn backpack rested heavily on one shoulder. Beside him walked his cheerful 8-year-old daughter, clutching his hand as though it was the safest place in the world. Neither of them knew that before the sun would set, the entire company would be forced to confront a truth buried for more than 20 years, a truth that would shatter pride, expose forgotten loyalty, and remind everyone that greatness is never measured by the clothes someone wears. Before we begin, if you believe that kindness, humility, and second chances still matter in this world, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to Hardworking Dad. Your support helps us continue bringing heartfelt stories that inspire hope. Elias Rowan had been raising his daughter, Mira, alone ever since his wife passed away from a sudden illness 4 years earlier. Every morning started before sunrise. He packed lunches, braided Mira's hair after watching countless online tutorials, made sure her homework was complete, and then hurried to work while carrying the invisible weight of grief and responsibility. Life had not been generous to him, but he refused to complain. His clothes were old because every extra dollar went toward school books, healthy meals, and making sure Mira never felt deprived. She never knew how many nights he skipped dinner so she could enjoy a proper breakfast. She only knew that her father smiled every day, even when exhaustion hid behind his gentle eyes. That particular morning was unlike any other. The company where Elias had worked quietly in the archives for years was celebrating its 30th anniversary. Executives from around the country had gathered. Luxury cars lined the entrance, photographers captured every important arrival, and banners displayed the smiling face of the company's celebrated CEO, Vivian Cross. She was admired for transforming the business into an international powerhouse after inheriting leadership from her late father. Newspapers praised her intelligence, determination, and sharp business instincts. Few questioned her decisions because her success seemed impossible to argue with. Employees had been instructed to wear their finest business attire. Elias owned nothing remotely elegant. He washed his best clothes the previous evening, pressed them as carefully as he could, and hoped they would look respectable. Mira insisted he looked handsome anyway, and her words were enough to give him courage. As Elias entered the grand lobby, conversations slowed. Expensive suits surrounded his faded jacket like bright colors surrounding an old photograph. Some workers whispered behind polite smiles. Others looked away, embarrassed on his behalf. The atmosphere changed completely when Vivian herself stepped into the lobby accompanied by senior executives and media representatives. Her sharp eyes settled briefly on Elias. She paused, glanced at his worn clothes, then shook her head with visible disappointment. Without asking who he was or why he was dressed that way, she made a cutting remark about how people who represented the company should at least look successful. Several executives laughed politely. The sound echoed across the marble floor far louder than anyone intended. Elias lowered his eyes but never answered. Years of hardship had taught him that dignity often meant remaining silent. Mira squeezed his hand tighter, confused by the laughter around them. She looked at her father, unable to understand why kind people would judge someone because of old clothes. The ceremony continued upstairs in the magnificent conference hall. Speeches celebrated innovation, leadership, and the company's glorious history. Giant screens displayed photographs of the founder, Malcolm Cross, shaking hands with investors, cutting ribbons, and accepting prestigious awards. Everyone applauded his remarkable vision. Elias quietly took his assigned seat near the back of the room. He had spent years organizing old company documents, preserving records that almost nobody else cared to read. Hidden among those forgotten files were countless handwritten notes, engineering sketches, letters, and photographs documenting the company's earliest days. While everyone else saw dusty paper, Elias saw memories. As the anniversary presentation reached its climax, the Master of Ceremonies announced a special exhibit showcasing rare historical artifacts recovered from the company archives. A display case was wheeled onto the stage containing faded notebooks, original contracts, and black and white photographs never before shown publicly. One photograph stopped Elias cold. It showed two young men standing shoulder to shoulder beside the company's very first workshop. One was clearly Malcolm Cross. The other was someone the audience did not recognize. Yet Elias knew that face better than anyone alive. The second man was his father, Arthur Rowan. The audience admired the photograph without understanding its significance. The presenter briefly referred to Arthur as an early employee before moving on. Elias quietly closed his eyes. Early employee. Those two words erased an entire lifetime of sacrifice. Arthur Rowan had never simply been an employee. He and Malcolm had built the company together inside an abandoned warehouse with borrowed tools and impossible dreams. Arthur designed the first production system, solved technical problems that nearly destroyed the business, and even mortgaged his own family home when investors abandoned them during the company's darkest financial crisis. Malcolm had repeatedly promised that when success finally arrived, both families would share equally in what they created. But life rarely follows promises. Arthur died unexpectedly from a heart attack only months before the company achieved its first major breakthrough. Legal documents remained unfinished. Malcolm, overwhelmed by grief and expanding responsibilities, gradually became surrounded by lawyers, investors, and corporate advisors. Years passed. Memories faded. Arthur's contribution slowly disappeared from official history until he became nothing more than an unnamed worker in company records. Elias had never spoken publicly about it. His father taught him that bitterness poisons the soul faster than poverty ever could. Instead, Elias quietly accepted a humble archive position decades later simply to preserve the truth hidden inside old documents. He never asked for recognition. He believed history mattered even when people forgot it. After the ceremony, an elderly visitor slowly approached the archive exhibit. His name was Leonard Graves, one of the last surviving engineers from the company's founding generation. His hands trembled with age, but his memory remained remarkably clear. When Leonard recognized Elias, tears instantly filled his eyes. He embraced him without hesitation, calling him Arthur's son loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Conversation stopped almost immediately. Leonard began telling stories no executive had ever heard. He described Arthur sleeping on workshop floors, fixing broken machines through freezing winter nights, and refusing larger salaries so younger employees could feed their families. He explained that Malcolm often admitted the company would never have survived without Arthur's brilliance and unwavering loyalty. Reporters who had been covering the anniversary quietly turned their cameras toward the unexpected conversation. Vivian overheard enough to realize something extraordinary was unfolding. Confused, she requested access to the original archive records. Boxes were brought from storage. One by one, handwritten journals appeared bearing Malcolm Cross's unmistakable signature. Page after page praised Arthur Rowan as his equal partner, closest friend, and the true architect behind many of the innovations that launched the business. There were even unsigned partnership agreements prepared before Arthur's sudden death. Silence consumed the room. Vivian read every page with growing disbelief. The confident executive who had mocked a poorly dressed single father only hours earlier now discovered that the man standing before her carried the legacy of someone her own father had considered family. She looked toward Elias, but he refused to meet her eyes. Not because he hated her. Because the past hurt too much. That evening, Vivian visited the archives alone. For the first time since becoming CEO, she spent hours reading letters her father had written decades earlier. Many ended with heartfelt gratitude toward Arthur Rowan. One unfinished letter contained words that changed her forever. Malcolm admitted he feared history would never properly honor Arthur if anything happened to him before correcting the legal records. Vivian realized the mistake had never been intentional. It had simply been buried beneath time, tragedy, and corporate growth until everyone who remembered the truth had disappeared. Except Elias. The next morning every employee received an unexpected invitation to gather in the central courtyard. Television crews returned. Investors arrived. Former employees stood beside current staff under the bright daylight. Vivian stepped onto the stage holding Arthur Rowan's weathered notebook. With visible emotion, she publicly admitted that the company had failed to honor one of its true founders. She accepted responsibility on behalf of the organization and acknowledged her own painful mistake in judging Elias by his appearance instead of his character. She explained that success without humility eventually becomes failure in disguise. Then she invited Elias and little Mira onto the stage. Thousands watched as the father and daughter slowly walked forward. Mira looked frightened by the enormous crowd, but Elias gently smiled at her, reminding her that courage often feels like fear until we keep walking. Vivian presented Elias with restored partnership documents, a permanent place on the company's historical board, and announced the creation of the Arthur Rowan Innovation Scholarship for hardworking students from struggling families. She also renamed the company's research center after Arthur, ensuring every future employee would know the name history almost erased. The applause lasted several minutes. Yet the loudest sound came from Mira. She wrapped both arms around her father and whispered how proud her mother would have been. For the first time in many years, Elias allowed himself to cry openly. Not because recognition made him wealthy. Not because titles suddenly mattered. He cried because his father's honor had finally come home. Elias never changed his lifestyle dramatically. He still packed Mira's lunches every morning. He still wore practical clothes until they truly wore out. He still believed kindness was worth more than expensive fashion. The difference was that now, whenever new employees toured the headquarters, they paused before a bronze statue of Arthur Rowan and Malcolm Cross standing side by side, their hands resting on the same blueprint. Guides explained that great companies are not built by one brilliant person but by loyal hearts working together, often without recognition. Mira grew up knowing that her grandfather's legacy had not been lost after all. She also learned the lesson her father quietly lived every day: respect should never depend on wealth, appearance, or status because every stranger carries a story invisible to everyone else. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, leave a heartfelt comment, share it with friends and family, and subscribe to Hardworking Dad. Your support helps these meaningful stories reach people who may need hope today. Special request: comment below with the words, "Kindness always wins," if you believe that a person's character is worth far more than their appearance. As the sun set behind the company headquarters that evening, its golden light reflected from the glass windows just as it had the morning before. But something had changed forever. The building no longer stood merely as a symbol of business success. It became a reminder that the strongest foundations are built not from steel or money, but from loyalty, sacrifice, humility, and the quiet courage of ordinary people whose greatness often goes unnoticed until the truth finally finds its voice.